see a lot of you here. To be quite honest, there's a part of me that was thinking, is anyone going to be here? That sound you hear is Timmy playing quite roughly with Ivy. Timmy, easy. We've got a very special guest with us tonight, Cotton Star. Welcome to the Transit Lounge. Really good to have you here. Cotton Star's really on the ball with the John Benet Ramsey case and other cases as well. I just want to welcome our mods. Stephanie's here. Well, Stephanie's here. I'm not sure if there are any other mods at this point. Not that we need a lot of mods for 20 or so members. Karina, good to see you. Robbie, Axie, Terry, Karina, PW from New Jersey. Good to have you all here. Susan Becker is also here. Good to have you here, Susan. Do I look tired? I'm feeling pretty tired because I went to bed quite late last night, based on where I am in my sleep cycle, and kind of woke up fairly early, so I'm really feeling a bit sleep deprived. Good to see you, Cotton Star. Yeah, this is a new painting behind me. This is a genuine Van Gogh, by the way. No, I'm joking. This is also obviously painted in the Auvers area, and it's in keeping with the subject matter of this chapter and tonight's live stream, where we're going to be dealing with nests. So it's from this book by Martin Bailey, Van Gogh's Finale. The last sort of month and a half he spent in Auvers, and this chapter is dealing with the cottages and the sort of look and feel that you get in Auvers. And then we're going to actually do two chapters tonight, chapter 3 and then also chapter 4. This is chapter 4, dealing with Into the Landscape. And it sounds like a lot. It's actually not really that much. So for those who are patrons on Patreon, you will have had the benefit of seeing a lot of the photos I took when I was in Auvers. I took some photos of sort of moss-covered roofs and what was it? Just kind of very old walls and just the sort of garden-like town that is Auvers. The roses there are quite phenomenal. I don't think I've ever seen roses that sort of resemble trees, that are sort of as tall as trees. Stephanie says, sorry, we keep you up. Stephanie says, this is the best kind of TCRS guided book club. Yeah. We actually need to do a full-on book club we actually need to go back to the StreamYard format, where we have a discussion. I kind of am torn between doing that as Patreon only and on YouTube, but that definitely is something we need to get into. Stephanie says, I'm ordering the book. Hopefully I get it before we finish. Okay. I love your passion. I love the fact that you aren't just sort of going with the flow. You actually, get yourself armed and dangerous in terms of our research. Karina says, thank you for the beautiful pictures. I love your perspective. Karina's actually said that she wants to go to Auvers, so that should be quite interesting. Okay, so we're going to, I think, jump into the chapters without further ado. I don't want to spend too much time sort of waffling. So in this critical analysis, we'll be looking at, as I say, 2 chapters of Martin Bailey's book. I did actually go and have a look at his book again. He's still got 10 reviews. I find that just quite surprising. It just shows you that there's a tendency to watch YouTube more than read books. It's just more, it's I guess, the format of the future. Do you guys agree with that? Kathy B is also here. Good to see you, Kathy. It's okay that you're late. We're just getting started. Jean Karras, we've got another mod in the house. She says, I might add this book to my bookshelf too. It is kind of a collector's item just because there's so many artworks in there. The narrative is pretty solid as well. The question is it completely accurate? Is it solid enough, kind of thing? So chapter 3 is titled Nests, and if you look at the painting behind me, you kind of get the sense with the thatch and the hay and the grass and the wheat that it kind of is like a nest, right? Funnily enough, in my garden, I've got not sort of hanging from the trees, but sort of on tables in my garden, I've probably got 3 woven birds' nests that are just sort of lying around, just because I find those weaver nests to be almost like miraculous, that a bird can do something so intricate as a matter of course, every summer kind of thing. Terry says, I pity anyone who attempts to be rude. Yeah, I don't think anyone is paying to be rude here. I actually had someone contact me saying they are patron on the $5 tier, and like, am I serious? Must they come here and pay money as well? This isn't really. This is sort of something separate. It's really. I don't really do many lives, and the fact is, the Van Gogh stuff is sort of for a select audience. So if you're not interested, or you're not interested enough to become a member, that's really okay. You don't have to become a member. You can watch if you find it interesting, and if you really are finding it really interesting and you want to participate, then you might want to join. That's really the way it goes. As Stephanie says, nearly every single channel now is membership. I know memberships came out quite a while ago, and I didn't really want to go that route for a while. I wanted to stay free. But I've also got to acknowledge that I would rather work less for a certain kind of income than work, putting out 2-3 videos a day, and then you don't do anything else. So, I definitely want to try and work smart. I've also kind of had a bit of a slumpy month here and there in terms of income. So I'm trying to do what is smart and what is necessary. Thanks a lot, Stephanie. Thanks a lot. Okay. So let's go into chapter 3. It's titled Nests. It is subtitled with another quote from Van Gogh's letters, Auvers is really beautiful. I think the full quote is, Auvers is really beautiful, among other things, many old thatched roofs, which are becoming rare. And obviously when I went to Auvers in 2019, May 2019, I don't think I saw a single thatched residence, which kind of made me a little bit sad, because it made you think, what was it really like? And couldn't they have tried to preserve that? And of course, thatched, one of my best friends has got a big kind of mansion that's got thatch, and whenever it's sort of 4th of July, not so much 4th of July, we don't celebrate that, but Guy Fawkes and New Year's and that sort of thing, he gets kind of a bit nervous. And also when there are thunderstorms, because thatch is so prone to combust, right? Stephanie says this is a phenomenal group. Okay, so I feel a little bit of stage fright. I know Cotton Stars in the house. I sort of feel I've got to put on a good show, but I really just want to reinforce a narrative in this particular episode. It's not rocket science. It's really going to be quite basic, the bottom line. And so about halfway through page 39, I highlighted a bit. It's also a quote from Van Gogh's letters, and he writes, "The most wonderful thing that I know in terms of architecture is the cottage with the mossy thatched roof with its blackened hearth." And I think that letter was to do with what he was seeing and encountering in Auvers. Regardless of the fact that when I went there, the roofs were now shingle, I guess, and to some extent modernized. It's still, Auvers today still preserves a quaint, rustic tumble of cottage roofs falling down the hillside. It's still very charming. It's still very idiosyncratic. It's still very unique. And it is quite a unique situation where you're in this little town, and these houses. Bear in mind, there are no shopping malls, there are no skyscrapers, there are no sort of. You'll really have to search to find a gas station, for example. It's just kind of these rustic cottages on and on and on. And anyway, they sort of tumble down the hillside uninterrupted, not like in straight lines, but kind of in a jumble. And that is how villages were a really long time ago. They weren't this sort of grid pattern, where it's absolutely, concentric and layers and so on, almost like crossword puzzles. It was kind of more chaotic, but in that lack of linearity, if that's a word, was a bit of a quaint thing. And what's quite amazing is my father built one of the first townhouse complexes in a particular city, and I think it was the second one ever. It was in the early 80s, and he purposefully built each unit. In other words, he didn't build them in lines, in straight lines. He built them all just slightly at slightly different angles. And he could have probably fitted in, if he wanted to, 4 or 5 extra units and made some extra money. But he wanted to have it easy on the eye and so on. And still a very sought after collection of, well, put it this way, townhouse complex. So Auvers kind of has that feel. It's not got that cold, straight. If you think of a straight road and houses that look the same, you know what I mean? It's very cold. It's very, compare that to the Hobbit house. And a lot of the feeling in Auvers feels a bit like you in kind of Hobbiton in a way. There's the nature sort of coming through, bursting at the seams in a way. And one can only imagine it was so much more so in Van Gogh's time. So anyway, he says, the most wonderful thing that I know in terms of architecture is the cottage with a mossy thatched roof. And that's something we don't really know. How does the moss, congregate in this thatch? I did see a lot of moss on the shingle roofs, but I guess that's a bit different. So I put a couple of photos of Auvers with the roofs and the chimneys and the trees, and even today it's still quite it's quite steep roofs, and it's quite a pretty place. I wonder if I can show you guys. You can just turn this. Maybe I'll have to pull this out there. Can you guys see that picture there? So that's something that I put on Patreon. I don't know if you guys could see that. As soon as I turn the camera, I can't see. So, well, this is now at a weird angle. Okay, so weirdly enough, when I put that up, I actually noticed the horizon has got a double horizon. There's sort of a foreground horizon and a background horizon, which you actually see in the portrait of Dr. Gachet. And then, yeah, so that's something I kind of noticed. So, let me show you guys quickly a picture of the roses that you see there. I don't know if you can see that. Just really amazing. Just the flowers is quite something to behold. I took photos of a lot of signs. Maybe I should just show you while I'm kind of scrolling down here. So let me just show you this. Those are just a lot of signs that you see in Auvers. Okay, so let's get back on track. So on the first page of Bailey's third chapter, quoting Van Gogh, we see words like, Auvers is really beautiful. These are Van Gogh's words. Auvers is really beautiful and the most wonderful thing. That's another quote. And also near the bottom of that page, Bailey writes that he felt joyous about his decision to return to the north. So just think about those words, beautiful, wonderful, joyous, right? And so I thought he was suicidal. Where does that come into the picture? Isn't he supposed to be suicidal? So we also get some insight into the conditions on the ground. From this chapter, Bailey describes Auvers for those first few days in May as unseasonably hot. Now, this is quite important because, when I was there, it actually wasn't very hot. It was actually quite, not chilly, but brisk, I guess. I was there in the same time that he arrived, the 18th or 19th of May, I suppose. I think you can see that from my Instagram. And it was quite sort of chilly. But I'd kind of gone to Portugal before that to be there at the same time that Madeleine McCann disappeared, which was much earlier in May, 3rd of May. And so by the end of May, I was traveling through France, trying to retrace Van Gogh's steps. And, well, quite a few new members. I'm not quite sure how to say that. Let's just have a look. Vid Inquiries. Good to have you joining us. Also, thanks a lot for your super chat there. Thanks a lot. Broken Dishes. Thank you also for joining us. So, it's important the fact that it was unseasonably hot because bear in mind where Van Gogh was staying. He was staying in kind of in a loft, and where I'm sitting right now is the first floor of a 2-story unit, and it's much warmer up here. In fact, I don't have an air conditioner in this particular room, but I do have 2 air conditioners in 2 other rooms, and I've got them on because this room gets so hot. But the point is, when I went to the Revue Inn and I climbed those steep stairs, and it's quite a steep sort of narrow spiral staircase, wooden staircase, and saw the small little box that Van Gogh was actually staying in, my first thought was, wow, he must have really suffered in the summer. Was he actually able to sleep at night, kind of thing. There's a little window kind of in the roof, but other than that, it's a sort of box in the roof. And it must have been really, really hot. Bear in mind, he went from May to June to July. And I think another aspect was also, remember, he died in that room. And so what is the temperature in the middle of summer when he was lying in his bed? He was probably sweating, not just from the pain and the stress of having sustained a bullet, but the heat of the night and being upstairs, So that's another factor. And then the question is, did he complain about that? Was he struggling to sleep at night? Was it a bummer? Did he not like his accommodation? And the answer is no, because he went out every day and he painted. If he couldn't sleep, and I can tell you, I didn't sleep terribly well last night. I didn't get enough sleep, and I wasn't really that productive today. I haven't put up a video on YouTube. I really had to twist my own arm to go and do a swim workout not that long ago. So if you're not sleeping very well, you can't produce. And that didn't seem to be bothering Van Gogh. So perhaps it was hot, and perhaps that was a factor, but he was tough enough to still go out every day and work. And so that obviously wasn't a factor. In other words, he was, how can I put it? He was sleeping properly. His energy levels were at such a level that he could go out every day and produce. Now, you can compare producing a YouTube video to producing a painting. I would say producing a painting is a lot harder, because you've got to walk out there, find your spot, paint it or sketch it to some extent, and then you've got to busily do it, and you need the materials for that. You need the painting materials. You're carrying it around, and then you carry it back, and then that's one day done. And we're going to get to where he talks about actually painting in the rain. Do you know of any YouTubers who do their thing in the rain, or who have weather to deal with? Besides the outdoor channels, I don't really think so. Anyway, so it's quite important to know that it was unseasonably hot, but also just basically, and you can see kind of behind me, the trees were blossoming, vines were growing, wheat was rising. I took a really beautiful photo, I thought, where I lay in the wheat fields. This is behind the ridge, not far from the cemetery, not far from where he painted wheat field with crows, where I lay literally on my back in the wheat field, and I sort of had the camera just pointing vertically upward with the wheat framing the blue sky. And so anyway, that is what was happening. The wheat was growing. Bear in mind, it's a farming community, so you would have little ducklings being born and little baby chickens and all those little farm critters, And so in this kind of environment of liveliness, do you think he felt sad and depressed and just wanted to sit in his room? So, I think the very first day after he had his very first breakfast at the Revue Inn, and this is just what Bailey is writing, is that he set off for work. So he didn't waste any time. It wasn't like he needed a few days to get his bearings. He needed a few days to sort of gather his energy. He immediately got to work. It literally says the day of his very first breakfast at the Revue Inn, he set off for work. So he's got no problem with motivation. You can kind of get the sense that the surroundings are so stunning that he can't wait to get out there. And I felt the same way. I couldn't wait to go and photograph everything. And, there were some days I was walking around all day, and then into the night, I was still walking around, looking at things and just absorbing things and taking photos. Thanks, Aneda. Good to see you here. Yeah, no writer's block either. So, here he is. He eats breakfast and he sets off to work, but I thought he's suicidal. Why is he working if he's going to commit suicide? Like, think about that. If you're about to commit suicide, is work going to be a priority? Aren't you just going to not work? Just, work's not, it's not, what's the point of working, right? So now we go to page 40, where Bailey again quotes a letter from Van Gogh to Theo, written on the first Saturday, I think, that he spent in Auvers. This is his first weekend in Auvers, and he says, "I've been very well these past few days. Not just well, very well." He also says, "Auvers is really beautiful. Not just beautiful, really beautiful. I thought he was suicidal." But why is he saying he's very well? Shouldn't he be saying, "You know what, I've been painting a lot, but I'm not really very happy. I've been painting these amazing landscapes, but it really makes me sad." He's not saying that. He's saying he's very well. And it's immediate. It's not like it takes him a while to get well. He's well kind of immediately. And he stays well because he keeps painting. To be fair, I don't want to be kind of jaundiced where everything is just he's happy and there are no cracks or problems. But there is a reference to an agitated sky in Van Gogh's Cottages at Cordeville, painted in June 1890. So, you could look at the sky behind me as well and say, is that agitated sky? But you could also look at the grass and say, is that grass agitated? Or you could look at the smoke coming out the chimney and say, is that wispy smoke kind of confused, muddled? You know what I mean? You can look for something there. And so Bailey does make this reference to an agitated sky, but over a scene of what he also calls rural tranquility. So what is going on? Is there agitation or is there tranquility? What's going on? And some people might think that the pictures I put up aren't from Auvers, but actually they are. I saw the sky occasionally and it looked pretty agitated. This particular photo I'm looking at here, I took kind of in the main street. You can't really see the surroundings because it's almost a vertical shot, but I just sort of noticed, wow, the clouds really look odd today. It's kind of these, it's almost like looking at a dry riverbed with all those cracks, and then it's inverted. So instead of the cracks kind of going inwards, they're puffing outwards, if that makes sense. I'll just show you quickly what I'm talking about. So that was taken in Auvers, and that was taken in Paris, which is about an hour from Auvers. We can also see it was kind of an overcast sky there, right? And so there's another sky. I wouldn't call that particularly unpleasant, but that was taken above Auvers, right? Can you see that? Okay. So I do think Bailey makes a good and incisive point when he describes Van Gogh possibly envying the families that he saw living in these traditional nests, as he called them, in Auvers. I do think that was something that he felt in Auvers. I also think it was something he felt in Arles. I think it was also something he felt when he lived, I don't know if you guys know, he actually lived in London for a while. I think he felt it also when he was in Paris. I think he, in a way, was sort of alone his whole life. I mean, if you think about like, who was Van Gogh's girlfriend? Who was, and bear in mind, his brother was married, his younger brother was married. Who is Van Gogh's girlfriend? And so you say, okay, so who is his girlfriend in Auvers? No one comes to mind. Okay, so who is Van Gogh's girlfriend in Arles? Okay, who is his girlfriend in Paris? And one of the thoughts that did occur to me was, could Van Gogh have been gay? And he definitely wasn't. He definitely wasn't gay. But this lack of sort of information when you don't know his story very much makes you think, wow, he didn't seem to have too many female companions. What is that about? But not for lack of trying. But I do think Bailey's right in that he is seeing people around him, and although it's really pretty, he's sort of feeling a little bit lonely. And I've got to say, I also felt a little bit lonely in Auvers, kind of for the same reason. I may even have felt more lonely in Arles, just because you're traveling on your own, you want to do certain things, you kind of want to tick certain boxes, and then every now and then you stumble on an absolutely stunning scene, and you kind of want to share it directly with someone. It's not like you want to take a photo and put it on a blog. You kind of want to excitedly talk about it and share your feelings about it with a companion. And because it is so exciting, it is so kind of invigorating. The other thing that I think is interesting is, so you could say that Van Gogh was lonely, and this was actually becoming a problem for him. You could also say that he sees other people, and that actually kind of wounds him. But the fact is, Van Gogh had an itinerant lifestyle for a long time, and he'd lived in over 20 cities and towns during his lifetime. I kind of done something similar. I've lived in various places in South Korea, various cities in the UK. I've lived all over South Africa. As a freelancer, I was also sort of jumping around a lot. And one of the results of a very itinerant lifestyle is you make connections and then you break them. You make new connections, then you break them. And so you don't really tend to make very many long-term connections because you keep breaking them, right? And that is exactly what he did. The other thing is, which I think is quite a good point from Bailey, he says that Van Gogh was living in quite impersonal lodgings. And what he's trying to say there is that he's painting these wonderful nests, these wonderful cottages, these wonderful quaint dwellings that people are living in, families are living in. It's not just families, it's animals as well. And yet he's living in this impersonal box. And not only in Auvers, he lived in an impersonal box in the asylum. He lived in kind of like a prison cell almost. And before that, he lived in the Yellow House, which was more of a home, but still kind of a bit of a dump. It wasn't really a home. In fact, he painted the inside yellow and he put paintings on it. It's not really a typical home. It's an artist's house kind of thing. And so the point I'm trying to emphasize is that the artist had a house, but not a home, kind of wherever he went. He had accommodations, but not a place where he belonged. And that was true in Saint-Remy. It was also true in Auvers. But the point to also make is it's not like that was suddenly new for him. It wasn't like when he arrived in Auvers, it's like, oh no, I don't have a home. And you know what I mean? It wasn't like that. It was like, he's just doing his thing. I'm going out to paint. Bear in mind, he was a painter from the Netherlands who chose to leave the Netherlands to go and work in England, and then left there he ended up in France. So he didn't have a problem not being at home. He chose to leave his family. And you know what I'm saying? When he's lived with his brother found him a bit disagreeable, and I wouldn't say kicked him out, but if he really wanted to be, how can I put it, in a home, he wouldn't have left the Netherlands. He wouldn't have left Paris. He would have stuck around Theo, right? So he kind of had this lust for life, this lust for adventure, and he was used to sort of, kind of a rough lifestyle in terms of sleep, get up, go out there, paint, come back, etc. And he was really just a passionate artist. He did it actually speaks about wanting some, let's say, carnal delights once every 2 weeks or so. But if he got that, then he was kind of on his way. We don't really know what happened in Auvers. That's a separate story. But I think Bailey astutely points out that to Van Gogh, the thatched homes around him were likely symbols of an idyllic family life. I think that he really was seeing around him like these symbols of almost like heaven on earth in a way, and then that is where the chapter cuts off. That's where chapter 3 just sort of terminates. And so, because it's a critical review, so I credit Bailey for saying this, but the part that I think is a bit incomplete is why not take that line of reasoning further? Why not say, okay, so look at the one home he did have access to and the one family he did have regular contact with, the home of Dr. Gachet. Did he have feelings of envy or harbor sensations of desire for who and what he saw there? So Bailey's saying, probably saw these idyllic family life scenarios here and there. Okay, yes, he did. Okay, but what about Dr. Gachet? What about the garden and the people that were part of that family? Was he feeling strange feelings regarding them, right? So he obviously was feeling something like that, but where is he going almost on a daily basis? Could those feelings of longing, right, in a beautiful rural setting lead to suicidal thoughts or lechery with the farm girls? Let me say that again. So he's got these feelings of longing. Think about him painting this picture right here, where I'm sitting, now turn me around, and now he's painting this picture. He's on the outside looking in. It's a very pleasant thing. While he's painting, someone is cooking lunch or something. Farmers are going out to their fields. They'll later return from the fields. Some people are planting vegetables or picking vegetables, and who knows what is kind of going on around him. But he's kind of like an outsider looking from the outside in kind of thing, right? And Jean says farm girls can be quite attractive, definitely. And farm girls in that setting can definitely have that freshness about them. You know what I mean? They're surrounded by flowers and blue sky and birds. It's almost like, think about the Snow White fairy tale. It's Snow White who walks through the forest and all the little critters run to her, the squirrels and so on. And on my very first day in Auvers, I walked along a road. The sun was setting, and it sort of shone through this passage of it was a road, but it was kind of a passage of grass and trees and so on, and it all kind of burned gold because of where the sun was setting. It turned all of these leaves and so on kind of bright gold. It's like walking through glittering gold. And in that little moment, I saw this beautiful little bird. I think it was a wren, but tiny little bird. And I'd never seen a bird like that before. I think they're unique to Europe, I guess. But so there's that like Snow White quality. Now you can imagine if a farm girl was walking into the light or out of the light, would have been pretty romantic. So the question is, again, is in this beautiful surrounding, it's a rural setting, it's calm and peaceful and idyllic, and there are people moving through that setting. It's totally different to the hardness, the coldness, and the the solitude of Saint-Remy, right? Welcome, Julie. Julie's a regular on Patreon. Welcome to the VIP lounge. So Robbie says wrens are beautiful. They've got these beautiful little triangular beaks when they open. Just a very small, petite bird. This is another picture I took of Saint-Remy, and you can kind of imagine what those roofs would look like if they were thatch. And look to the one side, you can see how the road is slowly turning. It's quite a nice picture, isn't it? So when you imagine that with thatched roofs and possibly not even a tar road, maybe it was a dirt road, and think of what that sounds like when a horse passes by, or it may even have been cobbles, or a wagon or something. It's a totally different sound. Instead of a train moving by, it's a steam train, and all the atmosphere that's related to that. So again, after a year in the asylum, didn't he feel like the feeling of being part of the comings and goings of a family? Did he like that feeling when he went to the gâchets and, these youngsters were kind of coming and going, and someone's cooking a meal, and all the sort of domestic things were going on, and it must have been quite charming to see at least one home from the inside, right? And could these feelings of inadequacy, I'm an outsider, I want to belong, could those feelings of inadequacy and insufficiently, could that have become a problem later on? Could that have gotten worse? And so you could say, what could happen if he was just getting merry on a weekend? Bear in mind, he was living kind of above a restaurant that served wine. If he'd started drinking a little bit of wine, and what could happen if he was starting to feel a bit uninhibited? Where's that going to take him? And so the question is, again, is that going to lead to him being suicidal? Is that going to lead to him falling in love with someone? He's falling in love with this place, but wasn't there someone that caught his eye, right? Now on to the next chapter. Chapter 4 is titled Into the Landscape. I kind of thought he could have done a lot more with this, but anyway, Bailey quotes Van Gogh in another letter written from Auvers saying, nature is very beautiful here. Not just nature is beautiful, nature is very beautiful here. Bear in mind, he's now not necessarily talking about the houses or the architecture. He's talking about just the natural beauty. Bear in mind, there's a river that is flowing through there. There's a hillside. There are farm fields, but there's also just nature. And it is very beautiful. And that is what he's saying. It's really beautiful, and nature's very beautiful. I thought he's suicidal. So chapter 4 kicks off with Bailey describing how liberating it must have been for Van Gogh to freely roam the countryside after spending so long, over a year, at the asylum. If it was so liberating to be able to roam freely, why would he become suicidal? If he was enjoying his freedom, to such an extent that he would go out every day and enjoy his freedom, why would he want to give up his life? So he's not stagnating, and he wasn't miserable or depressed or suffering from painter's block. He's not sitting in his room. He's not writing to Theo saying, you know what, everything here just looks the same. I miss the cypresses. I miss mountains. I miss pollution or something. He's not stagnating. He's going out there and he's painting. He's not writing to his brother complaining about his lot in life. But I thought he's suicidal. So I suppose you could say he wasn't suicidal in May. He wasn't suicidal, as we'll see, in June. and kind of wasn't suicidal for pretty much the whole of July. So then when was he suicidal? Was he just suicidal just before he committed suicide? So on page 46 and 47, I've circled Bailey's reference to Van Gogh painting a homage to another artist he highly respected, as well as a reference to particularly vivid colors under a deep blue sky. He also describes a scene where Van Gogh paints a sunken lane culminating in a flight of steps and finding two pairs of girls and a woman within the scene. I'll show that to you in a moment. But in a way, what you can do here is the same thing we could do with Shanann Watts' social media in the Chris Watts case, and also Gabby Petito and Brian's social media in that case, which is, are they being completely transparent about what they're really thinking and feeling? Is what is being presented in terms of Van Gogh, it's his letters and paintings, is that absolutely everything that he is thinking and experiencing, or is that the curated version of him, right? Bear in mind, I think Bailey said that if there were references to, I can't quite remember how he said it, but something about if there were references to treatments for syphilis, they may have been in letters. Those letters may have been destroyed. So even if Van Gogh didn't curate his image, somebody else probably did, if that makes sense. So in this particular picture, you see two girls walking side by side and also two women walking side by side. And then you see looks like an old man kind of walking down the steps. And so one's got to wonder, did some of these women and girls look at him, it's a painter in their midst, did they look at this guy, did they greet him, did they sort of lean over his shoulder and look at what he was painting? Was there any interaction? What impression did they have of him? What impression did he have of them? So this is, can you see that? So the other thing to bear in mind is this isn't the 80s or the 90s or the swinging 60s. A lot of these folk were very pious. A lot of them were Catholics as well. So, you might be a person born with all the normal appetites, but you nevertheless are in a cultural scenario where piety and all that kind of thing is going to factor into how people see one another. Yeah, Victorian age. So let's just look at some of your comments. Actually says the smell must have been beautiful. The girls were wearing white. Yeah, that's right. Village folk can be quite standoffish. They can also be very, not loyal, but they can be very considerate. They can be amazing hosts. And I must say, you do get that sense from the Revue family, that they were very nice to Vincent, that he felt very comfortable there, that he was looked after, that they were kind of almost like a second family. A conversation piece to see what he's working on. When I lived in South Korea, I was quite astonished that there's kind of a really, I don't know if it's changed over the years, but there's like a really strong rule that I think, I'm not sure if it works both ways, but I think a youngish male or female aren't allowed to just talk to one another. So just in a normal social situation, I think I was on a train at one point. If a university age girl or university age guy see one another, they can't just like go up and talk to one another. It's got to be brokered. There's got to be kind of an intermediary, somebody who introduces them, right? And I remember, of course, that doesn't apply to foreigners. As a foreigner, you're not a, how can I put it? You, in a sense, you're not a real person in a way, but in another sense, some of those strictures don't apply to you. And so I remember being on this train. I was actually going to support a South African taking part in the Ironman, and I somehow just became part of this conversation with a really beautiful Korean girl, and I think. I can't quite remember what was going on, but I know someone wanted me to introduce someone to someone else. But I just found it quite crazy how it was like, how that sort of worked. But the point is that you can have these cultural imperatives in certain countries and in certain times. And it's important to be aware of that. We can't just say, oh, Van Gogh was in France and it's the year 2021, and he probably just texted someone and got a number, and then they went on a date. Just wouldn't have worked like that. It would have been far more slow and all that kind of thing. And obviously the feelings are there, but what you're allowed to do and the pacing of it is also something else. So the other thing is, artists who paint homages to other artists and who use particularly vivid colors are inspired artists. They're emotional, but in a good way. They're uplifted, right? And so, again, think about somebody who's painting a homage. It's not like, I'm so unhappy that I can't think about painting homages. I'm so unhappy that I'm going to only use sad colors. I'm just going to use, black and gray, and I'm not going to use any sort of happy colors. No oranges and yellows and greens. I'm going to make the skies just very. The sun's just not going to shine in my painting world. Now, if you just look at the picture behind me, do you think it's a happy picture or unhappy picture? Just in a really basic sense. Do you think it's a miserable scene or a pleasant scene? I mean, I've got it hanging up in my bedroom, not because I want to look at it and be miserable, right? It is an idyllic scene. And so isn't that having an impact on the painter? Isn't the painter feeling pleasant and in a good mood and uplifted and all that kind of thing? So on page 48, Bailey describes Van Gogh taking another exciting direction. Those are his words. And he says, through his depiction of a bright red poppy field, and this is the painting. Let me just turn it around. Can you see that? Okay, so I don't mean to be facetious, but is all that scarlet, is that meant to symbolize blood? Or is Van Gogh simply painting a spring landscape, springing with poppies? Are those black lines in the sky? And you can sort of see there as well, there's a bit of darkness in the sky. Is that foreboding, or is that portents of doom? Or is it an artist in his element? Right? And so clearly Van Gogh is excited in a good way. So what I'm trying to say is artwork after artwork after artwork is showing you not only this lovely, pretty, inspiring environment that he's in, but he's also responding to it by painting it. And he's not painting it with the sort of, how can I put it, with the sun setting ominously behind it. He's painted lots of sunsets. He's not painting it with dark clouds or whatever. It's sunny and it's vigorous. It's invigorated with life. Bailey refers to many of Van Gogh's art being devoid of people. My own great-grandfather, pretty much, I'd say 90% of his landscapes didn't have any people in it. But he was actually a very sociable great-grandfather. I do think it's a prescient point, and I do think that no matter where he was on the scale of recovery, so even if things were great, even if his state of mind was A-OK, he had to have been lonely. A career as an artist is a struggle, and was a struggle for him. A career as an artist, he was a penniless artist. Certainly he was getting regular stipends from his brother, so he wasn't like absolutely broke, but he was basically living hand to mouth in a way, moving around. He had to have been lonely. So when Bailey talks about his art being devoid of people, it's not totally true. I've just shown you a picture where you see 5 people in it. But for example, this picture, I don't know if there's anyone in it. I don't think there's anyone in this picture. But then he also painted portraits. So, there's a picture with no one in it, and then a picture where someone is the full picture, right? It's someone is the entirety of the painting, kind of thing. The portrait of Dr. Gachet is filled with one particular person. And he painted quite a few portraits when he was in Auvers as well. So I think it's quite a good point from Bailey saying that, his art is largely devoid of people. His landscapes in Auvers are largely devoid of people. Ergo, he had to have been lonely. But then the counter to that is he'd been lonely his whole life. As I say, did he ever have a girlfriend? Did Van Gogh ever, he was going to marry somebody? And the answer is he did. But if you think about Van Gogh, you don't nobody comes to mind that was at his side. For example, when you think of Theo, you always think of Theo and Jo, his wife. When you think of Vincent, you think of Vincent and Theo. You don't really think of Vincent and a kind of a female figure. Do you get my point? So he'd been lonely his whole life. He was lonely at the asylum. He was lonely in Arles. He was lonely waiting for Gogh to join him. He'd been lonely when Gogh left, leaving him in disgrace, but he'd been in disgrace before, and he survived that. He survived disgrace before in his life. When Gogh left and left him in disgrace, he was actually kind of kicked out of Arles. And that's quite important to bear in mind. He's coming to another little town, and he doesn't want to be in disgrace. He doesn't want drama. He just wants to belong or be allowed to do what he's doing. And so what he was doing for the past 2-3 years, even more, was just trying to survive each day in the, what did I write here? Just the fact that he survived each day in the emotional devastation and the crystallizing solitude of the asylum. So if you want to talk about loneliness, he was really lonely in the asylum. He didn't have any family visiting him. He didn't really have any friends. All the people there it's probably even worse than being in jail because you're surrounded by lunatics, right? And that had to be really lonely, especially because it just lost his ear. Whether he cut off his own ear or somebody else cut it off, and Cotton Star actually sent some really interesting information on that. I think it was from Cotton Star. The fact is that had to have been hard. He didn't just go to the asylum. He was leaving all in disgrace. And now you've got to think about that. And are you going to recover your, not your good name, but are you going to kind of be able to go out into the world again, given how badly you've messed up, right? And I think you can, in a way, compare it to Brian Laundrie, the disgrace of the Moab incident, the disgrace of what happened in the Grand Tetons. And can you then carry on with your life, right? It's totally different here because Van Gogh didn't kind of kill anybody, but it's nevertheless that disgrace. How do you live with that disgrace? How do you pick up your life? It's not easy. So in the final 3 pages of chapter 4, I've highlighted 3 major points. Bailey describes the rich blue river, showing Van Gogh's delight in the use of color. And so I'm just highlighting him talking about these rich blue colors, and this is showing Van Gogh's delight. Yes, I'm sure that is how he felt. He was delighted by, these boats, because that was something that wasn't so much part of the setup at Saint-Remy. I wouldn't say it's not part of all, because there are ponds there and rivers, and I think he did that one portrait of all at night, and there are boats in the foreground, but nothing as beautiful as this. I've walked along the river Auvers, the river Was, and it's very pleasant. It's not built up. It sort of feels like normal nature, and so boats that are there would be quite pleasant. In fact, while I was there, I think a barge came by and kind of made a big wave, and I remember white swans paddling along and fish jumping out the water. So he was delighted by this. And I think there's a sailboat in the background. Think about how pleasant it could be to sail on a river that is winding through this pleasant little town on like a sailboat, or paddling, and a couple of people fishing along the side could be really pleasant. And here, once again, Bailey said his pictures are devoid of people. Well, here are 3 people in this particular picture. Let me again turn it around so you can see. Okay. I hope my battery's going to survive. I can only turn this around while it's unplugged. So when I walked along the banks of the river in 2019, I also found the tapestries of color delightful. I actually took this particular photo, which I posted onto Instagram. Quite a nice picture, isn't it? Okay. I see we've just passed the hour mark. I don't want to be on here too much longer than an hour. This is another picture from walking along the river, and there's a kind of a jetty. I just took that because that in that painting. The pictures of the swan and so on, I think, come from that's another. I'm not sure if it's a sketch, but another rendering of the river. There's I think a bridge. Okay. So it's lovely walking along there. I was just there with my camera, and the sun shining through just the leaves was like, wow, there's so much going on here. There were also some lovely little cottages right on the river that I remember thinking must be so cool living here, having a holiday home here, whatever. The second point I want to make is that Bailey describes Van Gogh's efforts to capture tranquil rural life. And then he talks about that he blends harmoniously. I'm not quite sure what the exact quote is in terms of blends harmoniously, but think about this painting behind me and how the cottages blend harmoniously into the landscape. Can you see it's sort of falling downwards? Can you see that the cottages are going down and the landscape's going down, but the cottages are part of the lie of the land. Even the smoke, the wispy smoke coming out there, sort of almost part of the cloud, right? The way that the thatched cottages sort of tumble along is almost like the grass. It's like the grass of the cottages, and the grass. It's like this kind of the same thing in a way. The slope is the same, but the point is that it kind of blends harmoniously. Think about those words: blends harmoniously and suicidal. Somebody who's suicidal isn't blending harmoniously. They're not blending, and it's not harmonious. If there's inner discord, why isn't that reflected in his art? Let me say that again. If Van Gogh is experiencing inner discord, why don't you see it here? Why doesn't he have thick, let me move my head out the way. Why doesn't he have thick black smoke coming out of the chimney and it's sort of covering all of these houses because it's ominous, and that's what is, where's that inner discord? Where is it? Finally, and this is the third point, Bailey makes another reference to one of Van Gogh's letters to Theo, and he writes, this is really quite amazing. He says, yesterday in the rain, I painted a large landscape viewed from a height in which there are fields as far as the eye can see. And then he goes on to use words like lush greenery. He describes a host of flowering vegetation, and then he renders the train passing, and these are his words. He says, the train is leaving an immense trail of white smoke in the greenery. Now, just imagine that. I had another picture up here last week, and this is the one that he's talking about. I also had the experience of a train moving on those same tracks, and it sounding like a storm. But here he's writing about that experience, and he says that this train left an immense trail of white smoke. It's not really white smoke, it's probably steam, right? And because it's a steam train. And I think this was what made an impression. The plume of white smoke or steam snaking and circling and almost taking a floral form as it sort of dissipated, conjuring giant white roses in the eternal green that ensconced him. And one can imagine that as being quite a magical thing to see. The energy and the power of that scene and why he kept at it. And here he is painting in the rain. This is a passionate artist, impassioned, inspired, caught up in what he's doing, captivated by what's around him. And this is the, just for those who perhaps weren't here last week, this is the picture that I'm talking about, that he's written about. So again, if there is inner discord, why isn't that reflected in his art? Why isn't that reflected in his letter? Why doesn't he say something like, I was painting in the rain and I just realized how hard I'm working and I just can't do this anymore. And then a train came by and, I could just feel the heaviness in my heart as the train, what do you call it, puffed on its way, through Auvers. He doesn't say that. He's kind of saying how lovely it is. Bailey's last word in the landscape chapter is to do with a painting called View of Auvers. I'll show that to you in a moment. What is Van Gogh's view of his new home in the countryside? So he's painting a painting called View of Auvers. What is Van Gogh's view of his view of Auvers? Again, is it dark and despairing? Are the clouds agitated? Are the clouds black? Are there black crows just filling up the landscape? Is it sinister and forlorn? Is it totally different to this? Is it just very dark and somber? Has the sun kind of gone behind a cloud? What's kind of going on? Is it the fields have turned to mud? There's been a storm, and it's just a disaster. And the answer is, well, Bailey's impression is that Van Gogh's depiction reflects his delight in his surroundings. His delight in his surroundings. Doesn't this behind me look and feel like delighting in your surroundings? Doesn't this, and I'll show it to you now, doesn't this look like someone delighting in their surroundings? Could you make that prettier and merrier and happier if you tried? You must remember that Van Gogh himself uses color to, in a symbolic way, to convey certain feelings and sentiments. We'll get to that as we go through this in more detail, but he's very aware of the symbolism of color. So if he really wanted to convey misery and loneliness, he would probably he would use less color, and the colors would be muted. The colors would be sort of saturated and dull, but they're not, they're vivid. So when Bailey writes that Van Gogh's depiction in view of Auvers reflects his delight in his surroundings, I think he's right. It does. I think delighting in your surroundings means your locus of focus is towards the outside. You're not sitting in your room thinking about what the world owes you. You're not sort of holding on to the disaster of Saint-Remy, what happened in all. You're not holding a grudge. You're not moaning or complaining or wishing or washing. You are focused on the outside. And you're so focused on the outside that you're going outside every day. And what the outside is doing to you is that the outside is touching you with its abundance, with its vitality, with its beauty, with its warmth, with its energy, with its liveliness, with its, the French word is esprit de vie. Bria will know if I'm pronouncing that right, but the esprit de vie is the spirit of life. So Van Gogh is going out and seeing things like this, and he's being filled up. He's being energized with the spirit of life. That's the opposite of the spirit of death. That's the opposite of the shadow of decay and dysfunction. But I thought he's suicidal. And so when I was reading this book, every time I saw a reference to happy, joyful, delighted, beautiful, and it was over and over and over and over again, I thought, okay, are you making the case that he's suicidal, or are you actually not making the case? Because you can't be happy, 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 delighted, delighted, and then, oh, okay, we've now got to wrap the story up. Okay, now he's suicidal, and then that's the end of the story. Somehow you've got to connect this person who's painting these pictures to the person at the end of the story. And the question is, does this art expert, does the mainstream narrative do that? Does it do it in a credible, reasonable way? And I think, let's be fair, let's be reasonable and say, thus far, our only real brush with the thought of death in Auvers is with Dr. Gachet. We've seen that he's got a bone collection. We've seen he's got an ancient cemetery in the back garden. We've seen that when Vincent came to visit, it was sort of the anniversary of his wife's death. We've seen that he's had brushes with the Prussian invasion, I think, that he's done some time as a military doctor. That's the only sort of aspect that is kind of negative, if you want to use that word. And then when you see the portrait of Dr. Gachet, he's kind of like this. So you kind of have all of these happy, sunny scenarios, but Dr. Gachet is kind of the exception to that. Do you see that? You have all these positive scenarios, that seem idyllic, but the doctor doesn't seem, he's not smiling, he's not doing cartwheels in the picture. He looks pretty glum. His eyes, his expression on his face and his body language suggests that he's not a happy camper, but not just that, Van Gogh's letters also say that. So, and I want to be quite explicit about this. Van Gogh is an expressive dude. He communicates, and he communicates to his brother that this guy is quite a miserable guy. Why, if he wasn't miserable himself, if Van Gogh himself wasn't miserable, why, if he was miserable, why wouldn't he say so? I mean, he's able to see the landscape, and so he paints the landscape. He's able to see this person, and we know that it was kind of the anniversary of his wife's death at that time. It was May 25th, I think. And so he wasn't perhaps in a great mood, but he was also a bit of an unusual dude anyway, given his preoccupations, given the skulls in the house. The house is kind of quite dark. And I think Van Gogh also didn't like that there were some valuable paintings that weren't framed. He was like, this is sacrilege, you've got to frame these pictures. And I think they even had an argument about that. So again, in this particular episode, the question is, do you feel like Van Gogh's quite a suicidal person? Do you think the narrative fits, or doesn't it? Do you think the art expert version that, you know what, behind all of this was this unstable guy, he just couldn't hold it together, kind of thing? I don't know, whatever you want to make the explanation. The mental instability went away and then it came back. The madness went away and then it came back. Stephanie says it's a soft feeling and warm. I just want to look at some of your comments. I'm kind of just about done. This will probably be quite a short live stream, not really more than 90 minutes. It's already 20 minutes past midnight here. Actually says Dr. Gachet's wife's name was Blanche not quite sure how to pronounce it, Castetz or Castets, Castetts. But try and find a photo of her, try and find some information about her. There's very little. Interestingly, Dr. Gachet wanted to write a book about Van Gogh and went to quite a lot of effort. One wonders what happened to that manuscript. But he apparently did go to some effort to put out a narrative of Van Gogh. I think his son wrote a book as well, Paul Gachet Jr. Stephanie says NVDL3 Bailey Naught. So I don't know what you guys think. In the next chapter, we are back to Dr. Gachet, and guess which picture he's using in this particular chapter. So it's quite interesting. In chapter 2, he uses the second version of Dr. Gachet, and in chapter 5? In chapter 5, he uses the first version. And he actually says here, this is quoting from one of his letters, I've done the portrait of Mr. Gachet with an expression of melancholy. She's actually saying that he was trying to convey that the doctor's not very happy. And so let me say that again, all of these scenes aren't conveying melancholy. All of these scenes that he's painting aren't conveying disquiet or whatever, but the picture of Dr. Gachet is. And I've told you, in my opinion, he's the murderer. Dr. Gachet, in my opinion, murdered Vincent van Gogh. And he's the only character so far who we've encountered that isn't part of this happy picture. And also Vincent van Gogh knows it. It's not that he's not aware of it, he knows it. Oh, okay, so your book will be delivered tomorrow. I'm so excited to read along. So that'll be quite interesting. Stephanie's going to have this book with her. So when we're going through the notes, she'll be able to see what I'm talking about, and also probably be able to say, hold on, he also said that. Maybe you should mention this or something, which is fine as well. So bear in mind, I've also written another book. I think Stephanie's read it, The Murder of Vincent van Gogh. So you can also get my view on the whole trajectory in The Murder of Vincent van Gogh. If you do read it, I advise you read the Kindle version. This book has got some lovely photos and pictures and paintings in it. The Kindle version hyperlinks to all the pictures and paintings you need to see, also to documentaries, also to news articles, so you don't miss out with the Kindle book. It's also quite cheap. So actually says, I got yesterday. Yeah, the second picture hasn't got the double landscape. Stephanie says, yes, I have it on Kindle, your book. Great. I can feel Timmy is at my feet, but I think he doesn't want to be picked up. Timmy, come. I think he's almost in dreamland. Rudka says, I just bought your book. Thanks, Rudka. Do you guys have any questions or comments? All I can say is I really enjoy the pictures that he produced in Auvers. Just all the artwork he produced in Auvers I really like. But I've got to throw a bit of a fly in the ointment and just say there are questions around that. The fact that he apparently, I actually read today that he apparently produced 80 paintings in 70 days. Sometimes I've heard it's a picture a day and that they're only 70. Sometimes I've heard 80. And there are some people who believe that some of those 80 pictures are fakes. I actually saw an article earlier today that said up to 45 Van Goghs are believed to be fakes. That's a lot. Earlier I showed you a kind of looked like a sketch that Van Gogh did of the river. To me, that just doesn't look right. I don't know, like it could be authentic, but when I look at that, I'm like, I just don't, like, this to me is genuine Van Gogh. That particular picture, I sort of look at it and I'm like, it just doesn't quite look or feel right. And maybe it is. Another execution that I just don't feel comfortable with is his one and only etching, and guess who it is of? Dr. Gachet. It just doesn't look and feel to me like a genuine Van Gogh. Maybe it is, and that is the horrible part of the Van Gogh story, is you start to sort of have doubts. Is this genuine? Isn't it? And you really shouldn't have that with an artist. You should know, well, this is legitimate. But there's so much fraud going on around Van Gogh that is the case. You've got to kind of keep an open mind and say, there's a possibility that's not genuine. And I think there's a very real chance that the second portrait of Dr. Gachet isn't genuine. I'm going to probably do a YouTube video on that. I could have, if I had just had the energy, I would have done that as part of this episode, but I'll probably do it as a lead up to the next episode next week. So look out for that. Sharon says, what did it feel like being there photographing Vincent's hometown? Do you mean Auvers or in the Netherlands? There was a sketch. Will we ever know for sure what, if something's a forgery or... Sharon, it was quite magical. It was also kind of frustrating because I could feel the myth. You know, when I went into the Revue Inn, there was a little bit of a tourist thing going on there, and then they would do the spiel, and then they would also talk about the last painting that Vincent van Gogh painted was Wheatfield with crows, and was the crows a sign? And of course, that wasn't the last painting he painted. And also, you know, we don't know what the last painting was because his art supplies disappeared. But anyway, so they kind of keep repeating the same story, and that's how it becomes mythology. And so that was a bit frustrating. I also contacted the Revue Inn. So you must bear in mind, part of me being there is me kind of having a holiday. I'm sightseeing, I'm absorbing, I'm exploring, I'm enjoying it. But there's another part of me that, as I've written a book and I'm trying to engage with certain people there. So there's also a bookstore, a bookshop in the sort of upstairs area of the Revue Inn, and I thought, well, maybe they could stock my book. And then it's like, well, I just need to have a conversation with someone, and then it's like, yeah, but we need the approval of the Van Gogh Museum, and then it's this whole steeplechase, and obviously the end of it is not getting anywhere, kind of thing. So it's kind of bittersweet. It was, for me, a very moving journey, but quite a lonely one in a way. But yeah, a very meaningful experience. But also on the other side, there was a bit of a feeling of, a sort of hollow feeling of banging your head against a wall. You know, if I was a writer that didn't care about my stories, then I would just go there and come back, and that would be enough. But you know, I want my stories to change the official narrative. And so that I found quite frustrating. And I experienced that all over. I experienced that also in Amsterdam. I experienced that in Newnan. They are totally committed to that narrative. And that narrative is why Van Gogh is celebrated as the artist that he is. And I think they're afraid to tinker with that narrative too much because it's kind of worked for them, if that makes sense. Theo's wife handled everything after he died. Yeah, Joe handled everything. Yeah, I never really, to be honest, I would say I never got a chance to talk to anybody about my research, like we have a proper, deep conversation. It was more about trying to set up a conversation, and then that just never happens either. So you say, I've written a book, who can I talk to? Okay, you need to do this, you need to do that, and then nothing. And I found that kind of unbelievable. Like, you might, in your back of your mind, think, okay, you're an idiot, you self-publish, you don't know what you're talking about. But Is it so hard just to show up and be like, shake the person's hand and say, okay, what do you think? Oh, okay, that's interesting. Are you aware of this? Are you aware of that? Nothing like that at all. So Stephanie says, thank you for 2 lives in a row and 2 thoughtful member chats. Thank you all. This is a really enjoyable experience. I must say, I was wondering whether you guys were going to show up. I'm really gratified that you're here. I see there are 76 people in chat, and I'm quite pleased that, for me, if a Van Gogh video gets 1,000 views, that's like, I'm pretty happy about that. And I see they've both gotten about 3,000 views. So maybe 10 years from now, when my channel's perhaps twice as big, maybe it'll really start catching on. We'll see. Cotton Star, I see you still here. He says it's unbelievable. It sells. Yeah, I mean, truth can be inconvenient, and also Van Gogh's story makes him very valuable. And let me put it this way, something that really struck me was a story of 2 paintings that were stolen, I think from the Van Gogh Museum. And they kind of went on a little adventure. These paintings is a true story. And, when the art thief kind of got out the window, he slipped. I don't know if there's a flagpole or a telephone pole, but he sort of slipped, and with a painting kind of in his backpack, he sort of crunched the edge of the one painting. But anyway, the paintings went on this merry little journey, and then a certain length of time passed. Timmy's kind of saying your time's up. A certain length of time passed, and then they retrieved the paintings. And so now the painting that went on this adventure now has a story behind it, and now it's worth more. The painting right next to it that didn't go on an adventure, that just stayed in the museum all along, is now worth what it was always worth. The painting that has now this story, this embellishment, which is true, is now worth more. So a story can have a big impact in the value of an artwork, right? And even more so, a story can have a value in terms of the artist. So that definitely is a fact. Can you see Tim is licking my arm or my wrist? He's very loving when he sits on my lap when I do a live. Cotton Star says most people don't have the ability to quote unquote see it. Yeah, so Cotton Star, that is why I often feel a bit like Van Gogh. I feel like I've done enough, but there's no recognition, there's no acknowledgement, there's no whatever. And obviously I wouldn't mind a little pat on the back saying, wow, you saw something that nobody else saw, or you've extended the leading edge of what is known about this beloved figure in human history. He's an artist, but an artist that means a lot to humanity. And I think it shows, in a way, the limits of our own humanity, that we can't see things or won't see things. And it's quite scary, that the fact that we are blind. Some could say that it's just a defect, but you could also say that we're purposefully blind, that there's an incentive to be blind. There's an incentive to not know certain things or want to know certain things because would it catch on as much, kind of thing. True Jedi Forever says the Foundation must have made a decision to avoid completely any discussion of a murder narrative. They know it is out there. So I wouldn't be surprised if 5 years from now, 10 years from now, maybe even 20 years from now, I don't think 20 years from now, but I wouldn't be surprised if after a certain period of time, it is found that Vincent van Gogh was murdered. And so somebody puts my story, it's not really my story, it's just something that I've figured out, I guess. And I wouldn't be surprised if you'll have some other person kind of becoming really well known as this Sherlock Holmes who's figured everything out. And then if I put up my hand and say, oh, no, actually I wrote a book, it'll kind of be like, yeah. Afterwards, this guy actually figured it out, you kind of peripheral, even though it's the other way around, that I actually did. I was the first person to do the true crime, treatment, and make, it wasn't just the one breakthrough, it was also, as I think Cotton Star, he sent me some information, just if you look at the stats, most injuries to the ear are somebody else cutting off the ear. Some of them are accidental. Virtually none are self-inflicted. That's just the stats. But I think you've got to know Vincent van Gogh, know the kind of martyr, M-A-R-T-Y-R, figure that he was. And even Paul Gauguin painted Vincent van Gogh as a sort of Christ figure, a martyr. He paints him with a very orange beard. Someone who is, being extremely self-effacing. And bear in mind, he studied to be a pastor for quite a long time. But we'll get to all of that when we deal with the events happening in July. What is he actually thinking? But it's important to understand that he'd already gone through this disgrace. And does he really want to admit that this respectable doctor has shot him? In other words, he's behaved in some way unacceptably again. He's brought disgrace on the family name again, whatever. And so is that really what happened? Or can he say, one thing that I was thinking about just the other day is when Van Gogh told the police that he said something like, I injured myself, he's still alive. It's not like he's died and he said, oh, here's my little note, I committed suicide. He's still alive. And so in his story, he's saying, I injured myself, probably believing that he was going to survive, probably hoping that he was going to survive, but that was going to be the story. And that's a totally different interpretation as well on what we know. Broken dishes, thanks very much. There are those for whom the status quo is desirable, regardless if honest or true. Yeah. So I've just found I need to keep working. I'm almost like Van Gogh leaving the asylum, and you're just working, and you are seeing the beauty around you, and you're filled with the spirit of life and working. And so I've also got to leave what feel like failures behind for me. There've been quite a few moments where I thought this is going to be a big breakthrough, and then inexplicably nothing. So, but you keep going, and what is definitely a comfort, Van Gogh didn't really have that many people seeing what he's really doing. He did have the one guy who reviewed his work, and I think his brother believed in his work, and of course he believed in his work. Maybe Dr. Gachet recognized his talent as well. But I certainly have the benefit that there are a lot of you out there, some of you have read a lot of my books and who know what I've been doing and what I've been trying to do, recognize what's kind of been happening and what is happening. And that makes the journey definitely a lot more bearable. Cotton Star said, when did Van Gogh say or write to Gauguin, you are silent, but I shall be silent too? That's a great point. I don't know exactly when he did, but he did say that. I think it was following the ear incident, was probably while he was in the asylum. Yeah. Sharon says, I've ordered 2 Van Gogh prints from Wayfair for my new living room. So excited. Thank you for opening my eyes to Vincent's art again. So what I really appreciate with Van Gogh is his story took me to these wonderful little villages in France, and I got to know such wonderful corners of France that, and I'd already been to France. I'd already traveled to Chamonix, which is amazing. I'd already traveled to what's it? Le Mont Saint Michel, which is, I think we had a biscuit tin at home, or some bag or something, and Le Mont Saint Michel was printed on it, and it was just like something that you couldn't believe was real. So I went to all of these amazing places in France, and then to still find these amazing little places just absolutely full of history and, in a way, mystery. And it's just really quite something to go there, and whatever anybody thinks, whatever the world thinks, whatever the mainstream narrative is, go there and just get a sense of the here and now, and what was the history of that place, that there's history in that particular field or building or road or area. That definitely was quite special. Axie says, I've been there. Where have you been? Have you been to Le Mont Saint Michel? Oh, Susan Becker made a kind super sticker donation too. Yeah, I saw that somewhere. Okay. So it's an hour 45. I'm going to see you guys next week for more discussion on Dr. Geshe. I must also just apologize. I've said something about that Bailey doesn't mention Digitalis or Foxglove anywhere. I certainly didn't find it anywhere in the first chapter, and I certainly didn't find it in the index, but I did find it in chapter 5. He just sort of mentions it in passing. It doesn't really mention that it's toxic or much beyond that, but it is actually mentioned in that chapter. So it's not like it's completely excluded, put it that way. But anyway, we're going to deal with that in the next episode. I will be putting up a video dealing with the reasons why the second version is very likely fake, probably on the same day, kind of in the morning. So look out for that. Corina says, I know a little bit what you mean. Rediscovered a part of Austria through my love of Gustav Klimt's flower garden pictures. Okay. Okay, guys. Timmy is sort of out for the count. I'm going to grab a pillow. I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode. The next picture I'm going to put up is going to cover the entire background. So it's more than 3 times the size of this one, also Van Gogh. So that's going to definitely, I think, be quite an interesting background. Same time, more than likely next week, around about this time. Okay, thanks, guys. Bear in mind, every episode, the tension's gonna ratchet up a bit as we approach these are the very last days of his life. Each painting he does is, one more painting counting down those last 70 days of his life. So it's not just that we're going through something. We're trying to get to a particular point. And what you're trying to look for is real signs and symptoms of his state of mind, and a particular state of mind that is part of the mainstream narrative. But also, we're trying to look at what was possibly really going on, for example, with Dr. Gachet. And there's quite a lot of background to that in the story about the faked Gachet. Just how paranoid his son was, how secretive his son was, all that's definitely quite interesting. Those of the patrons who are here who haven't read that script yet on Patreon, you should check it out. Sharon says, I feel sorry for Vincent. Yeah, to me, one of the saddest things he said was the sadness is going to last forever. I kind of got the sense that he was trying to live, but he was trying to, it's almost like he was almost on top of the mountain when he fell off. He was kind of overcoming kind of a sadness, and then he failed. Tragedy took hold, and so he said, the sadness is going to last forever, and in a way, it has, and it did. Karina says, see you next week. I enjoy this all, and you very much. His son may have watched him paint it. That's true. Okay, guys, thanks a lot. I'll see you guys next time. Take care. Ciao.